It's just a huge honor for me today to be podcast interviewing Dr. Brandon Ryff. We had him on the show at number 969, and we decided to bring him back with an update. Brandon is a graduate of the University of Michigan School of Dentistry. He holds a professional graduate certificate in strategic management from Harvard University and dual undergraduate degrees from the University of Arizona College of Medicine and College of Science. For the first 5 years of his career, Dr. Ryff practiced for a corporate group owned by a private equity firm. While practicing dentistry for the group, Dr. Ryff also served as vice president of business development and was heavily involved in merger and acquisitions and operations. Serving in this role exposed Dr. Ryff to a multitude of business principles and models, which he brought along with him to the next and current phase of career, serving as a fourth owner of Scottsdale Smile Center. And we just had the guy on just recently of the one that you bought that from.
Yep.
Don
Chiappetti.
Chiappetti. So thanks for coming back for another round of Dentistry Uncensored. Give us an update. So what have you learned since you've been on the show last time?
So we've been busy with the build out and first negotiating the new lease. We had to move the practice, actually. We ran into kind of an unfortunate situation where our building was sold. And the new owner wanted everybody out, and he was bound and determined to do it. We fought him for a couple of weeks and then found that he's got a lot more resources than I do, and it was not going anywhere. So we went ahead and relocated the practice 1.5 miles down the road to a beautiful new location that we had built custom for our patients and our team. And we've been there for about a year now, and it is.
Now, do you own the land and building this time?
Nope.
You're still renting?
Yeah, we're renting. It wasn't available for purchase. But
now, looking back, do you think when buying that practice that the practice broker, the legal team should have had more red flags on the lease?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Usually the rule is if you're going to buy a practice, you have to have at least the number of years left in your current lease, including options, as you do for the term of the loan. So if you've got a 10-year loan, you need to have at least 10 years left on a lease. And in this case, we didn't have that. We had 3 years left on the lease and 1 5-year renewal option. And so the bank looked at the situation and the fact that the practice has been there since the 70s, and came to the conclusion that the risk was very low that we would lose the lease and not be able to be there for 10 years. So they granted us an exception. And then, unfortunately, that's exactly what happened was we didn't have the right to be there.
So the guy that owned the building died.
He died, left it
donated to a charity.
Charity liquidated, which is what charities do. And then the new guy who owns all of the surrounding properties came in and decided he wants to level the building. And it was not long after he bought the building that he came to our practice and told us that essentially our lease, and this is an interesting point, there's a difference between a renewal and an extension. The original lease was signed by Chiappetti, I think in the 90s, and it had an initial term of I think it was 5 years, and then there was 1 5-year renewal option. What happened was the lease was extended and extended and extended. The initial term of the lease was extended 4 or 5 times, and then it was never renewed. And so that was a point of distinction where the new landlord came in and said, you don't have any options, you don't have any extensions. And our position was, no, we extended the initial term. It was extended and never renewed. So we still have 1 5-year renewal at the end of our current term. And so that's where a lease extension and a lease renewal are two different things. When you renew a lease, you're signing a new lease. When you're extending one, you're extending the term with an addendum, more or less, of your current lease at that time. So it would have been really, really tough and challenging to fight a guy like that in court, and to what end? Spend a bunch of money, lose stomach lining over it, and probably still lose. He's got more resources and better lawyers, and so it wasn't a winning argument for us at that point. We saw how he was going to play, and
I've seen a lot of brutal examples, and the point takeaway is stay in your lane. I mean, you're a dentist, and you know when to refer for wisdom teeth, implants. You're probably not going to do an all-on-4, but then you got to do that in the legal world too. There's 1 million attorneys in the United States, and it's a very complicated landmine. And so you really got to put your best lawyer hat. In fact, I look back at the best dealings I have is when I switched attorneys 20 years ago. I switched to a different attorney, and I've had no legal problems since. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So part one was the lease negotiations. So what are your thoughts on the lease negotiations now?
Yeah. So we had to obviously choose a new place. We wanted to keep it as close as possible to limit patient attrition, and we wanted to make sure that, of course, the property itself was suitable for our needs. I looked at the location in terms of visibility, parking, the size of the property, but I also went beyond that and looked at the politics of the area, since that was what directly affected us in the past. So I went onto the Planning and Zoning Commission website for the town of Paradise Valley, read through the minutes, searched and made sure that there's not some big master plan that I should know about. And luckily, there's not. It's a safe bet, at least at this point. And then the last thing that I also, because of the situation I had prior, I wanted to know about the person I was dealing with. So it was the property, the politics, and now the person, that being the landlord. And who are these people? And so now with the public records are so easily accessed now, I looked to see if the land or the landlord of this property had been involved in any litigation. And I looked up the last guy at the property. The guy had sued tons of people and been sued by tons of people, and so you're dealing with a litigious person, someone that thrives on that and likes it almost. I don't know,
right?
But luckily, the new people no such history, and they seem pretty reasonable, and there's no history of them.
The number one predictor of future behavior is past behavior,
right?
And so when you see these red flags,
yeah,
it's like the patient who's not happy with 7 different dentures from 7 different dentists. Right. I'm sure it's not the border molding.
Yeah, exactly.
So did you use a lease attorney? Did they only do dentistry or commercial, or how did that work?
So the firm that sold the practice to me also has a dental real estate arm to it.
And who's the firm? Are they only do dental?
Menlo Group. Yeah.
Oh, Menlo Group. Yeah, we've had him on the show.
Yeah. So Matt Porter was the broker that sold me the practice, and then Rich Andrus is the real estate broker that I dealt with for this transaction, and he wasn't representing the property; he was actually representing me. So I went to him to help broker this deal. And it's interesting, the whole thing with the attorneys, and that's something that I learned real early on. I kept the broker and the lawyer. They oftentimes have competing priorities, and one wants to get a deal done and closed. The other wants to, go through the agreement and find any potential problems. And in my opinion, sometimes, unfortunately, create problems that don't need to be there. And then, people get emotional and they get upset, and then all of a sudden you have this long, drawn-out thing. Everyone's upset, and no one's happy, and that's not a good thing. Not to mention the fact that in the few weeks that I was taking on the last landlord with lawyers, I racked up $6,000-7,000 fighting with someone that doesn't even matter. So my approach with this was to keep the broker as a resource to help guide and to be my communicator to the landlord and represent me based on what I'm telling him he can say, and then the lawyer wants to get in and do the negotiating on my behalf, and for a hefty fee, I would presume. So I had a lawyer, the whole process, but I kept him till the end. His job was to review the final documentation and make sure that it reflects the spirit of the deal. And the broker, he was my go-to person to interact with the landlord. And so that negotiation going in, number one, I had to make sure that I knew what I wanted and what I was talking about. So I did a lot of research, just Googling things. People talk about triple net. What is triple net? What does that even mean? And so literally I self-educated myself, look up these terms, just being prepared and knowing what you're talking about when you're going into a negotiation, I think is critical. And then from that, needed to know what what needed to happen out of the deal. What did I need? What did I want? What could I negotiate? And what things was I prepared to lose? And that's a really important part of it, because sometimes you can plan your acceptable losses, and I don't know, maybe aim high for what you're wanting and what you ask for, and then they counter back with something maybe less, but in reality that's possibly what you wanted all along, and then you both feel like you won. They feel like they won because they didn't just give in; they were able to counter, and then you accepted something lesser. So we did that, and I've also learned in the past to mimic the response of whoever it is that you're negotiating with. So if and start out reasonable, you go first. So these guys were decent and reasonable and professional, and I mirrored that back. They sent me an initial contract that had some problems in it, but their lawyer wrote it, not them. And so just remembering that it's not like the landlord went in there and tried to write some crazy agreement. It's the lawyers. It's always the lawyers. And so the first one, whoever is least prepared and whoever gets emotional loses. And so just kind of keeping an objective frame of mind when looking at this, and trying to preserve the relationship. Because remember too, the landlord, he's going to be around for who knows how long. So we want to sour the relationship over something that really doesn't matter. And so I had a list of things that I absolutely could not bend on, and I had some things that I wanted but didn't have to have. And so I didn't hit them with this huge list of demands, but at the same time, I gave them enough to where the second time I go back, I may ask for the rest of it. But what I tried not to do was say, okay, let's make a deal. Here's what I need. Here's what I want. I get it. And then I say, oh yeah, actually one more thing, and then we're good. And then, okay, sorry, there's one more thing. That's how you ruin the relationship. And so I was very clear and upfront, but again, that took preparation, knowing what I was talking about. Number one, knowing what I wanted and needed, and then approaching it with the thought in mind that this is just business. It's not personal. Stay level-headed and preserve the relationship. And it worked out well. I think they're great people, and they've been excellent so far.
Arm & Hammer, I remember in his autobiography 20 years ago, he was into collecting bulls, and he flew. He wanted this bull, and it was like $1 million bull. And he got in his private jet. And he flew all the way over there, and he wanted to buy this bull. And the guy pulled that step on him. He said, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to do this." And he raised it from, I think it was $1 million to $1,100,000. And Arm & Hammer had $1 billion, but it pissed him off. He went right back to his jet and flew home.
Mm-hmm.
Never even talked to him again. So preserving the relationship is so important. Did you want to own the land and building so you wouldn't have to do all this? Did you think about that, going to another place where you could own the land and building, or was this just a better location?
Yeah, it's a better location, and I guess this is this is something that a lot of dentists try to figure out, and some agree it's advantageous to own the building. Some agree that it's or think it's better just to rent and spend your money on other things and make other investments that have a higher return. And I guess it's situation by situation. Me having student debt still, plus the debt of the practice, I think it would be probably impossible, to be honest, to even get financing at that level in that part of town. And I don't know that it would really help me out a whole lot because right now I think having credit available and having cash and not adding additional layers of risk is worth it to me to just rent.
So are you in Scottsdale or Paradise Valley?
It's Paradise Valley. If you write Scottsdale on the envelope, it still gets there, but we're technically within the town of Paradise Valley.
So I bet land would be pretty pricey up there.
Yeah, it's pretty expensive, but the lease I think is quite reasonable.
Yeah,
and so we were able to actually get this beautiful practice at a rent that's lower than what we had in this old dilapidated building that is soon to be knocked down. If it's already, it might even be knocked down. I haven't been over there in a little while. But
so now, do you have to personal guarantee this lease? And what does all that mean?
Yeah, so actually that when I was talking about the things that I absolutely had to have, that was a really important one to me because personal guarantee, what does that mean? Okay, if I default on my rent payments, what remedies would the landlord have to collect? Could they come after your house? Could they come after your car? Can they take your firstborn? What can they do? And what happens when the situation becomes more complicated? Let's say you get divorced. Is your wife on that guarantee still? Because she's going to fight you for it, and that's going to create some tension beyond what would already be there in terms of who's getting what assets and now who's getting what liabilities, and that's a big liability. What happens in the case of your partial or total disability? What happens if you die? And so, this one's interesting. What happens if you sell the practice? Does that guarantee follow you? Well, for my two predecessors, technically on that lease, if I were to default, they would go after both of them. And Gepetti, he doesn't own the practice. He doesn't have any control over its operations or any of that, yet he's on the hook. And so that was important to me to not be in that position. And at the same time, I also understand the purpose of it. The landlord's trying to secure, at least some idea of the rent being paid for and not having to go through lots of hoops to get the money that they're owed. And so I get it. But once you have the risk level to what's appropriate for someone just to take you at your word, whether that be making payments on time for 5 years and never having a late rent payment, at what point do we get rid of that? And when is it appropriate when you sell it versus anything else? And what I demanded was, if I'm dead or disabled, there's nothing that I can do at that point. And those are two things that have nothing to do with me running the business poorly or running it into the ground. And so I didn't want my family to be on the hook at a time that they would need financial security the most. So I was able to get that. If I'm disabled or if I die, I'm off the hook. If I sell the practice, I have to be on the hook for 1 year, and if all rent payments are made by the new owner, then I fall off of that guarantee.
So you want to have you have the lease assumption agreement.
Yeah, and then you got the lease assumption agreement, and that's one that's a challenging one for a lot of people too. I've seen deals fall through because the landlord refused to grant the buyer a lease assumption agreement where it could be transferred from the seller to the buyer, and that's a requirement, of course, for the bank to fund the deal. And I saw one where the landlord said, "Yeah, I'll do it, but it's going to cost you," and they basically held the deal for ransom. And so I programmed into our lease agreement that it's a guarantee that my successor will get a lease assumption agreement if he has or she has at least 3 years of experience, they've got a FICO score in the excellent category, and if they have 1 year of rent payments and cash liquidity, those three conditions are met. It's a guarantee that they get a lease assumption agreement. I felt that those three things would mitigate their risk, and a reasonable person would grant the lease assumption agreement in that circumstance, and they agreed. So,
Nice. Now, did you learn some of this in your Harvard training?
with respect to the negotiation, 100% of what I know came from that, and the other stuff was a combination of the broker. Rich Andrus was very, very helpful and kind of gave me some tips on.
Who's this?
Rich Andrus, the broker from Menlo.
Okay.
Yeah, he identified these main areas, and he was a great sounding board. So I say to him, "Here's what I'm thinking. Is that reasonable, or what do you think the response is going to be?" Because I don't know. I don't know if what I'm asking for is completely unreasonable, but I do know that I ended up writing the language myself instead of the lawyers, and sent it to him, and it's clear enough language. It doesn't. That's my point. Not everything has to be done by the lawyer. Sometimes two people that speak English and want to have a deal can write plain, simple verbiage and get it done.
So, you recommend Menlo?
I do. They were very fair and very honest. I remember a time, especially with Matt Porter, where it was actually Coombs that I bought the practice from. Coombs bought it from Chiappetti, but anyways, there was a point of disagreement, and I remember Matt Porter and I meeting for coffee early in the morning, like 6 o'clock early, and talking about it. And mind you, Matt representing the seller, and he, instead of trying to push and pressure me into things, he laid it out as I think very neutral, very fair presentation of it. Here's what Coombs is thinking. Here's Ryff, what I presume your concerns are with that. You guys got to work this out, but not in a way that's pressuring me, not in a way where he was trying to strong arm me and support his client. So you don't see that very often. Usually brokers are trying to just close the deal as quickly as they can, and they tell you how great this practice is and all of that. But I think Matt was very forthcoming and very fair, and ultimately Dr. Coombs and I came to an agreement, and today I consider him my friend, and he's still at the practice.
So how does that feel? How's he wanted an exit strategy, so he went from owner selling it to you, or Jonathan Coombs, then Coombs sold to you. How does that change your relationship when you used to work for them? Now they work for you.
Yeah, I thought back to how I felt when I worked for corporate, and I didn't mind working for.
And who did you work for?
It was Dynamic Dental Partners. It's gone defunct now, but before that, it was My Family Dental Centers under Eric Kurbs. But I remember.
And why do you think it went defunct?
I think that once they fired, Alex Giannini, he's a great guy. I consider him a mentor and a friend. And once the private equity guys pushed him out, now we had a non-dentist serving as CEO. And I believe that you need to be a dentist and actually live the experience.
What was Alex's name? Giannini?
Giannini. He's been on your show.
Yeah.
Giannini.
So you thought that the main deal was the private equity. They didn't know dentistry when they got rid of their dental guy.
Yeah, dentists, they don't like being stripped of their autonomy. We like to feel that we can have the freedom to do what we think is right and what's best for a patient. And once you start making it difficult for us to do our job, while at the same time purporting to be there to make it easier, when it's the opposite, and we come to work and we find that we're having to unravel problems that don't need to exist in the first place, just changing things that aren't broken, making it difficult. I was talking to one of my buddies who works for corporate, and he was saying basically you can't even replace a light bulb without having to fill out some form and fax it across the country and have it get processed and then have it approved and then have a work order generated. When in private practice, you get a step ladder and you reach up there and you unscrew it and you put in a new one. It's a simple thing, and that's a real example. So, with that in mind, my relationship with Chiappetti and Coombs is one of mutual respect, and I give them their full autonomy. Whatever materials they need, they order whatever equipment they need. We make sure it's there. I don't tell them what labs to use or not use, and I never interfere with their daily practice. They have full autonomy as if they were an owner in terms of who they have assisting them. I don't interview their assistant. That's they're going to be working for them, so it's important that they choose who they work with. And my goal was that the beauty of being an associate is being able to be a dentist without the headaches of ownership, and that's always what was practiced before I got there. Jonathan never stripped Chiappetti from any of his autonomy, and so I just kept that tradition going, and it made a lot of sense.
They both still work with you.
Yeah, well, Dr. Coombs, he was only supposed to be there for 3 months. That was the agreement. I didn't have a problem having him there longer, but he didn't want to at the time, and so 3 months came and went, and I said, "Hey, what's your plan? What are you going to do?" Well, I'd like to stay. I'd like you to stay, and it just made sense. But I don't think that he was really expecting it to go as smoothly as it did. And I think this should serve as a model or an example of if you're able to keep people in one place and have them actually want to work there versus having to work there, because neither one of them, trust me, neither one of them has to work. They want to be there. They love the patients. They love the team. They love their practice, and they enjoy what they're doing, trying to keep it just clean, pure and simple practice dentistry. So I manage all the headaches because I'm the owner. I'm doing my time in that regard. But they come to work and they do what they do best, and they're both amazing dentists, and they're just there practicing.
It's kind of a mindset. Some people like the business and some people hate it. And what that's just a given. What I always wonder about is when I got out 30 years ago, if more people had the mindset to own or is that changed? Some people point to an obvious demographic that now the class has gone to half women, or women more or less likely to own. I don't know. I go back to my graduating class. The average woman dentist from my graduating class crushed it more than the average man. They were all aggressive, big $1 million practices. I mean, it was amazing. But do you think the average classmate from AT still coming out in your backyard at Mesa to Midwestern Glendale, what percent of them do you think will want to own versus they just want to be associates their whole life?
Yeah, well, my understanding is most of them from those two schools, there's a high percentage relative to other dental schools across the nation of them going into specialty school. And of course, in many cases, incurring additional debt beyond what dental school costed for some undergrad. And so I think that the dream of owning your own practice, whether it be doing a startup or buying something that's existing, I think that dream is threatened and challenged by the debt crisis, the student debt crisis. And to answer your question, I think it's going to be a very small percentage that directly go into doing that. These would be people that, there's family money or whatever it may be. But someone like me, when I graduated dental school, that wasn't even an option. I was just trying to make sure I could make my minimum payments, which, that didn't even get me very far. So I think the dream is alive and well, but it's threatened, and I think that we need to do something about managing student debt and really be smart about approaching that so that we can keep the private practice model alive. One thing that's going for us, though, is, in my opinion, a lot of the corporate practices, and they're not all the same. Some are worse than others, and some I think are okay.
Some are worse than others.
But my view on this is that a lot of patients come to us because we're not corporate. We've had patients call and say, "Is this a corporate practice?" We say, "No, it's not." Okay, great. I'd like to make an appointment. And so I think that we've created this segment of patients that wants a private practice where you don't have some non-dentist CEO who's focused on the shares and profits and everything else, and is actually committed to the number one priority being the patient.
Yeah, I'm always worried if all the dentists work for a business person, then where do Americans go when they need a doctor?
Right.
And if the doctors if their hands are tied by insurance, government, corporate, Wall Street, then where do they go when they need a doctor? It's just. I always think now, it was always when I had my practice, where would I want my 4 kids to go? And now it's like when I pass on, I got 5 grandkids now. It's like, I don't want them going into and it's not anti-corporate. I'm not anti-corporate or anti-DSO. I'm just pro-grandchildren. I don't want my 5 grandchildren going into a dental office where some non-dentist saying, they say things like, if the pocket's over 5 millimeters, you should put in Atrodox, or you should put in, all these things. Like, where does that come from?
Yeah.
You're not stay in your lane.
Right.
You're not a doctor, and there's just way too many doctors. Did you see that? Did you see that one? What was that? Anyway, one dentist just got 15 years in jail, accepting corporate kickbacks. Did you see that in the news?
No.
It was all over Dental Town, but basically, where was that story? Metro Health dentist got convicted. Big insurance company. But anyway, so do you want to continue? What about the relationship between tenant improvements and rent?
That's a good question. So, of course, when I found out we had to move, I'm scared because I just took out this huge loan for this practice, and then now I've got to move it and incur all this additional expense. And so when we were doing the negotiation, it was almost like a formula that they had. So what they started was we got base rent, and then they offered I think it was $25 a square foot for base rent, not including the triple net. And then they offered $75 a square foot for TIs, which amounted to about $250,000 for that size suite. And I look at it, I'm like, wow, that's great. And they gave me a couple. It was like a worksheet where we had a couple different scenarios, and another one. I think it was okay. We'll go up to $26 a square foot for the rent, and instead of $75, we'll give you $80. Like, wow, so that's even more money. That's got to be more than $250,000. Well, that sounds great, but that's where I think people need to be careful, because while it may be enticing to take that additional TI, because it's only increasing your rent by so much, you got to remember that you've got a 3%, or in my case it was 3% annual increase in your base rent, and so if your starting point is 26 now instead of 25, then you're incrementally getting bigger and bigger at a faster rate than you would have if you were at 25. The other thing, and I have no intention to sell, but let's say I had to, now, since the rent is higher, my business is less profitable. And a lot of these models for valuing practices now, it's not so much it's whatever percentage of your collection. That's in my opinion, a thing of the past, because you could have a practice that does $1 million a year and loses 200,000. I mean, so you're not going to pay 80% of $1 million for that. You can pay nothing. It's become a function of what is the profit of the practice, and it's a multiple of that, 3 to 5 times, in most cases, what they term the EBITDA. So if you are increasing your rent, you are decreasing your profit, and so that's going to affect you in terms of the enterprise value of the business by a factor of at least 3 to 5, if and when you go to sell, and that's just where you're starting. So this is going to become even worse as time goes on. And so where I went with it, and I could have gone the other way too. I could have gotten my rent lower, below the 25, with less TI dollars. And so where I decided to go with it was 25 as market rate, and I figured that's a good place to start because it's market rate. What I also programmed into the agreement was it's a 10-year agreement. So at the end of the 10 years, I've got 2 5-year options. So at the end of the initial term, when we're looking to renew it for the first 5-year option, at that point, we go through an analysis of market rate and what that is, and we can calibrate it. Let's say we've had 3% increases over the 10-year period, and my base rent at year 10, the end of year 10, is way higher than market rate. Now we're going to go back to market rate, and so I think keeping your initial base rent no higher than market rate is a safe place to be. And then the TI dollars that come with it, you get more TI dollars for signing a longer initial lease. So if you sign a 5-year lease, you're going to get less TI dollars. If you sign a 10-year lease, you're going to get more. And it depends on if it's already improved or not. If it's not improved, you could expect more TI dollars. If it's already built out, they're not going to give you those kind of dollars. Well, this was not built out. It's a plastic surgeon's office, and so we had to have everything demoed and then start from scratch. And so then at that point, it became, what's all this going to cost? I know I've got the $250,000 from the landlord. I know that I've set aside some cash, and then I know that in the bank, by the way, First Citizens, incredible people. I can't even begin to tell you. They're just awesome.
Do they have a dental department?
Yeah, they do. They do. And
where are they out of?
I think North Carolina is their base.
First Citizens Bank.
Yeah, and they've got a couple branches. They're not a very big bank, at least in Arizona, but they're incredible people, just really, really good people.
Why do you think East West Bank got out of financing dental?
That's a good question, because I think most people know that a dental practice loan is one of the least riskiest loans that a bank could possibly offer.
It was for mounting losses with DSOs, but I think one of the problems that people think about DSOs, they always think of people who have 500 plus locations like Aspen and Heartland. What they don't realize is that the average DSO is 2 or 3 locations. And so you see Heartland, Aspen, and Pacific, they've long passed critical mass and gone, but I see the highest bankruptcy level somewhere between $2 and $4 million. Just like the one you were talking about when they got rid of Alex, where these guys that get to 2 or 3 offices without if you're going to go from 1 office to 2 or 3, you better have the best systems in the world.
Yep.
And they start expanding emotionally because they want to grow, but they don't have the systems in place.
I think that's absolutely true. What we see, a lot of growth companies, even outside of dental, you follow this S curve. So you're going real slow, then practice takes off, or the growth company, and then starts to level off again. And I think that where people hit that ceiling, like you're describing, when the skill set and the business decisions that one makes to get on that initial upswing for the S curve are not the same skills and business moves that are required for the next level of growth beyond that. So at the time you've got a dentist or anyone who's running a growth company, when they're hitting their peak there, right before they peak out, they should have established and in place the next set of skills and the next part of their plan ready to go before the top of that S curve levels out. That way they can tap into another upswing and another S curve before the first S is complete. And so what it takes to run a single practice is not what it takes to run three, and what it takes to run three is not what it is to run 5 or 10. And at the nationwide level, completely different skill set.
Yeah, and there's a lot of dental offices that are doing $40,000 a month, and they don't have the management team to go to 80.
Right.
And there's a lot of dental offices. You see dental offices. 750 is the sweet spot, median, mean. But there's a lot of offices that do 2 to 4 million in one location, and so many times, like a staff will come in and you were doing 30 a month, and they build you up to 60 a month. So they think we're doing so great, and they just want to stay there forever. But sometimes that team that's going to take you from 60 to 90 weren't the ones that took you from 30 to 60.
Right.
It's just different people. And it's also interesting where you're in a neat situation where you've had two successful dentists have an exit strategy. A lot of when dentists get married, they never have a prenuptial. So their divorce is always going to cost 4 to 10 times more than their student loans. And so when they want to talk about financial planning, it's like everything they talk about financial planning has nothing to do with financial planning. It's like, don't get divorced and don't drop a bunch of kids. And if you're going to get divorced 2 or 3 times and have a big family, I don't care how you invest your money.
Yeah.
You're not going to have any.
Right.
But the other thing is with exit strategies. Jonathan Combs and Dan Chiappetti. It's just not that common for dentists to have exit strategies. Why do you think they had exit strategies while still in their prime? And does that mean that you have an exit strategy? I mean, the two guys before you had an exit strategy. You're a young kid, 2 young babies. Do you already have an exit strategy?
I do, not from dentistry, maybe from the stresses of running a large practice, and it's a lot of work. You don't know what it's like until you do it, and I love what I do. I don't know that I'm going to be doing that 10, 12 years from now. I do know that I want to be doing what those guys are doing. And doing dentistry, and maybe not having to deal with the HR issues and being the fiduciary for 401k and dealing with compliance and regulatory issues and all the other nonsense that is Dr. Chiappetti puts it. Anything that gets between him and his patient, he's got a problem with, and sometimes it's directly like some of the things that I described with some of the corporate practices. And sometimes it's indirect because it takes up your time. It's those things that I think would prompt me to want to have an exit strategy, but it wouldn't be from dentistry. It would be from the management and ownership part of it. But I'm also having fun. I mean, there's a lot of really cool things that we're doing, and we've got a team of really talented people that are engaged and enjoy coming to work and take pride in the practice as if they themselves were owners. And it's a really unique opportunity to create such a culture and environment where I look forward to coming to work, but it is stressful. So I think that Doctors Coombs and Chiappetti played it right by being good dentists, knowing that if you do good work and you work hard, you treat people well, that you're going to find success and financially. You'll never be in a situation to have to do anything, and I think that's the best strategy, business exit strategies anyone can have, is not being forced or having to by necessity do any particular job especially if they're not enjoying themselves. But I know those guys do phenomenal work, and I know that they enjoy doing what they do. And I asked Dr. Coombs the other day, I said, what would you do if you had millions of dollars? Would you still come to work? And he said, absolutely, I would. I wouldn't walk away from dentistry. And he said that it would become at that point a hobby, of course, but he would still do it. And I believe it. He's good at what he does. Same with Don. And that's where I want to be. So I see their exit strategy is one that doesn't involve leaving dentistry. As I said before, both of them could walk away from dentistry, but they don't, and they haven't.
If I won the Powerball, I'd just get divorced again. That would be.
I'd pay for that. Yeah.
So I want to continue on. You care about falling into this about the lease and everything.
Yeah.
Go next into the build up.
Okay.
Or where did
yeah. So of course, it makes no sense. It made no sense for me to think about all the things that we're going to do and how we're going to build it until I understood the budget. I needed to get my head around what things were going to cost in a general sense before getting specific as to, okay, we want these kind of countertops, we want this kind of this and that and the other thing. We needed to understand from monetary perspective, what's our cash flow situation, what's our leverage, how much credit would the bank give us if we needed it, and what is this going to cost, a range. And once I understood that, kind of had an idea of what I could spend, high and low range of that, then it was time to start thinking in terms of the patient. And it was really important, I think, to think about the build out in terms of the patient. It's not what I want, what I like. That's for my house, not for the practice. So the practice built it for the patient. We thought about the demographic, the kind of patient that we have there, what they expect, and what was consistent with our philosophy of care. If you've got a high quality practice, you're doing high quality work, and you're not insurance based, and you've got patients that come in and expect the best, are you going to put IKEA chairs out in the waiting room? Probably not. And it's consistent with the business model and the money that's coming in to support not putting IKEA chairs. Not saying there's anything wrong with it. My point is, know your patient base, know the demographic, and build the practice based on the patients that you're serving. I knew that I was going to need some help. It was really important to involve a designer, I think, because there are things that I just never would have thought of, and that's why someone's a designer. They've got gifted minds in terms of creating a feel. If you want a certain feel to your practice, you're not going to do that on your own. I don't care how good you think you are at designing. You got to have a good designer who works well with the architect and general contractor. Those three are critical. And managing, because again, this is just like I said with the lawyer and the broker. They've got competing priorities. You've got the designer who wants to do all this outside the box stuff, which is cool, but you've got the contractor who's thinking about the framing and the drywall, not the feel and the ambiance and the artwork. He doesn't care about that. He's got his part, designer has their part, and the architect is just trying to reconcile what the two are trying to communicate in terms of the structure and the design and the overall feel of the practice. And so I assembled my team, and I chose my people for that. And then I literally got a piece of paper and I drew out what I had in mind for the floor plan. And then I gave that to the architect. He made it look official, and it was an initial concept. And then I took that and I put it on the break room table. And I got the opinion of the team, and they had some really, really good suggestions. I'll give you one. My office now is more toward the entrance of the practice, and the sterile is all the way at the end, almost to the back of the practice. And before it was swapped. And my hygienist, she said, why do you want to have sterile toward the front? So all those people have to walk past the sound and the unsightly appearance of a sterile area versus having the doctor's offices there and then putting that toward the back to minimize the number of people walking past. It's brilliant. I wouldn't have thought of it. It's absolutely brilliant. So I did that for a number of reasons. One, of course, to get the ideas, but two, to get the team engaged and excited. They were part of the process. And so they started talking to patients about it. And, hey, we're going to be moving, and the design is really, really great. You're going to love it. We're really excited about it. Now they're excited about it instead of just sending out a letter and saying, okay, we're moving. And then the patients are finding out at that point. And so that's how we did the design. Once we conceptualized the floor plan, then it was time to have the designer come in. And Dr. Chiappetti and I met with the designer. She had a presentation. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's how we think that we're going to get the feel that we're looking for, and this is our idea. Presented it to us. It looked great.
Now, does she only do dental or not really?
No, she does. She does all kinds of stuff. I know when she was working on our project, she was also doing the interior of some guy's jet. So I don't know. She does boats, jets, nice houses. I presume everything in between. But she had done the design for our former office many years back, and had a great reputation and did a great job. And so we just went with what we knew we could trust, and it ended up being a good choice.
The two founders of Key Construction in Kansas, which went from a startup to the largest construction company in all of Kansas, they said they were going to go into construction, even though there was nothing really new in construction. They've been building pyramids 5,000 years ago. But he just said that in construction, that it was typical that they weren't dressed in uniform, they didn't have name tags, they were always running late. It was just that if he was just going to go in there and everybody showed up for work and they stood behind all their work and stayed on budget, that they would just crush it. And they did. They built the largest construction company in Kansas. And I've been living out here in Arizona where everybody, it's the same thing where they say construction, if they say it's going to take 30 days, it'll take 60. If they say it'll cost $1, it'll be $1.20. Construction never, dentists did root canals like constructioners do construction. It'd be, so what were your thoughts on that? Did it run smoothly? Should people listening to this expect construction to go smoothly and timely and on budget?
No, but remember that these guys have other jobs, other places that they're working on, and they've got their own pressures within their own companies, and they understand that you've got a deadline, but sometimes you got to keep people focused and you got to keep them coordinating and communicating, because again, you've got the designer who is ordering things and ordering different decorations and tile and all this other stuff, and she can't do her part until the contractor's done with his part in a lot of cases. And so it's just managing the tension between them and keeping my expectations reasonable. But one of the most important things that I did that I tell anyone, don't rely on anyone except yourself and maybe your dog. That's it. You need to be there. I went there almost every day during lunch, and if I didn't get there during lunch, I went there on my way home, and I would walk the site. And I can't tell you how many mistakes that I found and proactively addressed. And still, we finished about 2 months late, and I'd say about 20% over budget. I think it planned on spending no more than maybe $130 a square foot, and we were up past 170. So, yeah.
And what do you think most of that what do you think that $40 a square foot was mostly?
Things that I didn't have to have that I chose to do anyways. And I don't regret it. Anything and everything that I said yes to had to either add to the patient experience or it had to add to the efficiency. And so the flow of the practice was really important. And in terms of patient experience, that comes visually, of course. When you walk into the practice, I think you should spend most of your money on the lobby, because that's where first impressions are formed, and that's where patients ideally don't spend a lot of time unless they're waiting. But still, they're there, and the hygiene area has the highest volume of patient flow, and so spending extra money on that part of the practice, I think, was important, and just giving it a feel and a look that I think added to what the patients expect and what is consistent with the level of care that we deliver there. And it's, I think, important to make sure, again, that when you're doing something, it really does have to add something. If it doesn't, you're wasting your money.
And when you're building out, I mean, when we talk about EBITDA, EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, the IRS is it's insane, because when you were spending all this money on the build out, it's just not deducted right at the end of the year. You have to
Yeah,
depreciation, taxes, amortization. What are your thoughts on all that?
I'm going to share with everyone. It's kind of an embarrassing mistake. Even with all my training and business, I made a really dumb mistake in thinking that when I was spending all this money, I was thinking, yeah, I'm not going to have any tax due this year because I'm spending all this money. And then came December, and I met with the accountant, and it became evident at that point that I was wrong. And what you're doing, and these are not, what I did was I confused purchases of all this equipment and paying the contractors and putting out all this money. Those are not business expenses. That's not the same. It's not counted against your revenue like dental supplies. It's reflected on your balance sheet, and instead of incurring an expense, as the IRS sees it, I acquired an asset. Just like if I went and bought a car, I acquired an asset, and you have to pay ordinary income tax on that. And so I ran into a situation where my expense became not the actual expense of the project, but also the tax dollars that I needed to pay the IRS in order to get that amount of money. And the other thing at the same time was we started the project, the build out, in October, and so it was just long enough left in the year for me to put out a lot of money before the end of the year, just to learn that because these items were not placed in service, and because we didn't have a certificate of occupancy, none of it could be counted in that calendar year. And so I not only had to pay the money to all the contractors, I had to pay the IRS a six-figure bill at the end of that year, a few months after I started the project. And the TI dollars, that $250,000 that the landlord shipped forward and helped us out with, it was in the agreement, and I missed it. And I'll tell everyone, if you can, don't do the fronting of the money like I did. I had to pay the contractor and then get reimbursed by the landlord in 3 different payments. And so I had to front that money. And then, of course, I didn't get reimbursed by the landlord overnight. And so the combination of the unexpected tax bill and having to front that money, and, of course, paying the money in the first place. So all of that came together, and it was tough for a while, but it was my mistake, and it's one I hope other people don't make. So if you're going to start a project, start at the beginning of the year. Make sure you're going to finish it within that calendar year, because you cannot deduct, depreciate any equipment or tenant improvements until you have placed the equipment in service and you have a certificate of occupancy for the TIs to be deductible at that point. And then remember too that the equipment, especially now with the Tax and Jobs Act of 2017, the Trump tax cuts, now there's bonus depreciation, which is rapid accelerated depreciation of equipment. You can depreciate essentially all of it in the first year. In some cases, it gets a little complicated. I'm not super well versed in all that, but I do know that TIs, depending on the situation, you're depreciating that over 15, 20, sometimes 30 years of the useful life of the tenant improvement versus the equipment. You can depreciate that right away. So because of that, and the bonus depreciation, that is in effect through the calendar year of 2022. So anyone that's thinking of buying equipment, you can depreciate the equipment rapidly over the next couple of years, but not beyond that unless they renew the tax cuts.
Well, you said you didn't know that. It was a mistake. I mean, nobody. I mean, as of 2014, the tax code was 2,600 pages long. I mean, it's just when everybody's been screaming this my entire life. I mean, the tax code. I mean, when they started the IRS, it was one question: what was your income? Then you times it times 3%. Then you submitted that. And now it's 2,600 pages long. Hell, when I talk to my tax attorney, that's all he does. And every time you ask him a question, he's got to think about it. He's got to look at it. He's got to see what case. I mean, it's really criminal. I mean, there's nothing simple or straightforward about it. And most of that code was written. Most of those were written by lobbyists to make it even worse. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wish we would have talked about?
One last thing about that depreciating the assets. If you ask your general contractor very nicely, they can allocate the tenant improvements that are specific to dental. So, say the plumbing for all of your operatories versus the plumbing in the bathroom, which is not dental related. If they can allocate the tenant improvements that are dental related, then those can be depreciated like equipment on the rapid acceleration table versus taking 15, 20, 30 years. And that really, I think, helps out a lot too. So anyone that does that. But other than that.
So what he's really saying, though, is what my dad used to sing to me when I was little, and I'd sing to my four boys. The easiest dollar earned is $1 in expenses saved. The second easiest dollar earned is $1 in taxes saved. The hardest dollar you'll ever earn is going back and do another dollar's worth of dentistry. And the dentists, they're all stressed out. So how do they do their stress? They take an extravagant $20,000 vacation a year. Well, hell, you were stressed because you were living above your means, and now this makes it even worse. And you got to play that tax scheme. I mean, there's 2,600 pages of tax code, and you have to navigate, that IRS, because when Americans say that the most expensive item they'll ever buy is their house, that's because they just see their paycheck. So if I get my paycheck and it says I make $1,500 every month, I just see that 1,500. I don't see the gross pay. I don't see what the employer had to pay with FICA matching. They don't even see the taxes they had taken out. If they did, they would never say their house is the most expensive thing they'll ever buy. Taxes is the most expensive thing you'll ever pay. And you'll pay more in taxes than second house and third in a car. And taxes is it's crazy. So it's not what you earn, it's what you burn. And the easiest dollar earned is $1 in taxes saved. Second easiest dollar earned, $1 in taxes delayed. And the hardest dollar you'll ever earn is going back in that operatory and do another quadrant of MOD composites.
Yeah,
because that's just work.
Yeah. I think one thing I want to point out here about buying a house. I can't speak for every dentist. I can't speak for every bank. I can just tell you my situation. I bought a house, a very modest house, right after dental school. And I drove the vehicle that I had all through college, all through dental school. And I drove that vehicle till finally blew a head gasket 5 years into my dental career. But I bought that house right away. And I think that it's really important to point out my situation, having bought that house, the appreciation of the house itself is going to pay off. I've got a balance. It's going to pay off 75% of my student loan debt later on this year when I sell my current home and move into the new one. And then the student debt is gone. So I essentially I bought this house, I lived in it for free, and then it paid for half of my education.
Nice.
So that's something that, otherwise you're paying rent. I know it may sound like a hypocrite because I'm paying rent on the business side, but on the home side, don't pay somebody else's mortgage. Pay your own mortgage. And trust me when I say the bank is going to look at the house and say, okay, that's fine. What's your payment? And they take all of your personal finances and they take all the finances of the practice and they lump it all together. And then if it's positive on the bottom, then we're good. If it's not, then we have a problem. So buy a reasonable home. It will not, if it's reasonable and it's the right practice at the right price, it's not going to keep you from buying a practice. It does not do that. And I know there are a lot of people, do I buy a practice first or do I buy a house first?
I've had a funny conversation about 3 times over the years where a dentist, they were all 3 in Southern Cal, which has exploded in the last 30, 40 years. But this dentist was so emotionally because when he went to go sell his practice, the person who bought it, here's this old fuddy-duddy dentist, and he sells his practice, and he thinks the dentist is a young guy. But the dentist wasn't dumb. He bought the practice, land and building, and then as soon as it was his, sold it to the developer, just leveled the whole thing. I mean, the dentist didn't even realize that the land was worth more than his dental office. Remember that movie? What was that movie with Danny DeVito about the lawyers, the liars? Well, but basically that scam of that movie was a very common theme where Wall Street would see a factory, usually along the coast somewhere in Pennsylvania or something, and maybe it was a textile or whatever, and they realized, my God, it's on the ocean. We need to turn that into a golf course and condos, and so they would buy these factories, and of course, when you do that, everybody loses their job. Been working there forever, but 3 times I've seen a dentist sell their practice in good faith, only to realize it was some young kid who realized that the land was worth more than the whole damn practice, everything.
Yeah.
And the dentist was upset about it, just like that movie. What was that movie with Danny DeVito? Do you remember that?
I can't think of it.
It was the most famous. The funniest quote, and the girl asked him, no, he goes, would you like a donut? And she says, I'm not hungry. And Danny DeVito says, since when do you have to be hungry to eat a donut? But that movie was a very common real estate play where the real estate's worth more than the land of business. But I want to thank you so much for coming back.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For being transparent, for being honest with what you did right, what you did wrong, and transferring those knowledge to other dentists. I just think that's really admirable. I just think you're an awesome guy, and I'm just so glad that you came back and shared.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much for having me.